Hello, welcome back. This is the second content recap episode, and for this one, we will be going over um, the collection of our factions and gangs, which we touched upon last episode when we showed the map of the city and the areas that they controlled. But now we can, take a closer look at, how we sculpted each faction, what it means, and what their kind of MO is. Um, so let's just move quickly into it. Now, before I reveal too much, let me talk about how I decided to go about writing our set pieces. I decided to go with Aristotle's 12 desires that lead to either being virtuous or those who have vices. There's a list of them here, and I've kind of attributed each one of them, or kind of separated some of them, or combined some in some cases, to give qualities to some of our gangs and factions. I can run through them one by one and explain a little bit more of what I mean. So let's take our first faction, for example, the Copper Precepts, or the Yellow Caps, for instance. Yellow Caps being a simpler name for them, not a derogatory term or a positive name, just another name that's kind of given to them. They don't seem to mind all too much, but their official name is the Copper Precepts. These guys serve as the law enforcement for the city. They kind of look out for everyone and try to keep everything under wraps as best to their ability, despite not having the most capable of inventory to work with in terms of officers and how well equipped the officers are in this world, this fictional world that we're building. Although they do have the benefit of having high numbers, which is pretty nice. So how did we write the Copper Precepts into our story? Well, we based them off of the desire of fear of danger. This is, how do I explain this? Yeah, it's just one of the desires. Having the fear of danger, it leads to a desire of wanting to flee from the danger or deal with the danger in some way. Now, having too much of something and having too little of something can be very dangerous. To be properly virtuous in terms of dealing with danger is good to have courage, and this is a virtuous trait. It's good to be able to face what's in front of you. But if you're not courageous enough, you'll be very cowardice, and this is considered a vice, as it is a negative trait. And as is rashness, if you're too headstrong and wanting to head into danger recklessly without properly thinking out the situation, or just dealing with it in a very ineffective way, as means of your wanting to get out of danger, having overpowered you. If that makes sense. Sorry for the kind of roundabout explanation, but you get the idea. Cowardice, courage, rashness. You want to fall somewhere in the center. So that's kind of the premise of how a lot of these are written. So each group will have, it's not that every character will be one note. This character is a coward, this character is courageous, and this character is rashness, and there's like a sprinkle of everyone in there. No, characters are more complex than just one notes like that. But it does serve as a good guideline for what each group's members should kind of represent. And we can have certain members of the groups that are more virtuous and some members of the group which are more vice based. So moving on to our next group here, we have the Umbral Monolith. The Umbral Monolith, much like the Copper Precepts, are the only other gang with no abilities. We can go into abilities later at a certain point. But the basic idea is they do not have the same capabilities and powers that the rest of the group have. Although, despite that, they have managed to make a name for themselves, as they operate pretty efficiently and they are just pretty strong, considering their, what they are lacking in. I decided to base them off of pleasure, as I figured it was a desire that best suited them, having some people that are insensible, some people that give into overindulgence, and some people that have a good level of temperance. There'll be a more sadistic group who kind of aren't afraid to get bloody and beaten and dirty, and kind of based off of pleasure, could probably enjoy it, or completely dull to the pain of hurting others. Either way, they're a very brutal group, and you don't really want to get involved with them too much, because they certainly won't hold back at all. Although they are at a disadvantage from the get-go by not having the powers available that the other factions have. Let's move on to this third group. Now, these were actually two desires at first. There was small giving and large giving, or greater giving. I can't remember the exact wording on it, but I think the best way of thinking about it is either giving or forgiving, or just kind of how you deal in situations, So what are you giving? This has the vices of stinginess, pettiness, extravagance, and vulgarity, with the virtues of generosity and magnanimity. Magnanimity? Sorry. Yeah, my throat is a little hoarse at the moment. Sorry. Oh. Please excuse that. So where was I? The Magnari are a not really family based. They are quite the juggernaut over the city. They're kind of meant to mirror, not necessarily mirror, but they're kind of a more mafia based faction, being organized and having a kind of house that rules over the city. They're quite the powerhouse in terms of the layout of the city. If you had seen last episode on the content recap, they own most of the city, or at least more than any other faction, and a lot of factions combined. So let's just tackle our main group here, which I have decided to combine yet again two desires. Now, combining two desires again for this one, like we did with our small giving, greater giving, kind of a less. It was a more difficult choice, because small giving and great giving, those are attributes you can see similarities between, but honors and achievement are kind of things that we strive for. So that's the kind of similarity I saw for there. And the group's name here is the Empire Zenith, and it just occurred to me, and I didn't show the group's name, the Magnari, when I showed them. Yeah, this is what they look like. So this is our protagonist faction called Empire Zenith. They're based off of honor, achievement. You can see the virtues and vices that they're based off of here. we kind of have the group leader of them being pretty ambitious and wanting more, although at the current situation he doesn't really have as much to work with as the rest of the factions have. Not to mention the fact that they'll probably be gunning for him pretty quickly, right off the get-go of the story, but we can get into that when we tackle the story more. Moving on to the foil of our protagonist faction, we have the Spiral Nadar. Now, the Spiral Nadar are a little bit at the opposite end of the desired list, so we are going out of numerical order. Just for this one, based down here at resent injustice. So having the vices of malice and envy, and the virtues of righteous indignation. This will kind of tie into the conflict between our protagonist faction and our antagonist faction. There'll be more on that later when we're writing the story portions, but for now, just know that there's going to be some fun conflict between those two groups. So let's go in terms of what's on this page. And when you have it, it would put us back in order. At number 7, anger. The desire of anger and acting upon it. This group is our all-male group, Interlocks. And they're based off of the desire of anger and how you want to deal with such things. Now, if we move on to number 8 here is where it might get a little confusing, as I haven't properly attributed this to anything, although I have reserved it. Being truth, having the vice of false modesty, and the vice of boastfulness, with the virtue of truthfulness. This is a quality, or 3 qualities, that will be given to several or few freelance agents that will kind of come into play later throughout the story. But I feel like it's unimportant now to explain, because they'll be kind of they're not so much to the large players of the situation, and they'll be coming into play at a later date. So let's just move on to number 9. Another different case, as instead of using 9 once for one faction, I split the vices and virtues by removing one of the virtues and splitting the vices into 2 factions. We have the Stern 6 and the Bababoon, which is quite ridiculous to say, but they exist for a reason. The Bababoon represent buffoonery, and the Stern 6 they represent humorousness. Now, what the Stern 6 are they are a group of 7. The first S in SIX stands for 7, and as you can see, there's 7s in the logo, despite having also just like 6 quadrants, and it can be easily misconstrued, but it is not something that they like to joke about. Sorry, I'm catching my breath real quick. Yeah, so let's move on. So these ones, just in summation, we split these ones up, and they can represent their own things. Number 10 is social life. So the vices of unfriendliness and flattery, with the virtues of friendliness, which is pretty straightforward, honestly. And this will be a quality represented in our all-female faction, Mental Mercury, as you've probably seen above. Which kind of not necessarily a foil between these two, and not necessarily a pure rivalry either. But obviously there'd be conflict between the all-male group and the all-female group. To some degree. Doesn't need to be a large amount, but we can touch on that later. Finally, the group that we haven't touched on yet, number 11, which, this should be final, but we touched on that already. Number 11, fear of disgrace, the vice of shamelessness, excessive shame, and then the virtue of a well-balanced amount of shame. I'm not, well-behaved. This is our religious group called the Church of Repentance, I've been considering going with calling them the Saints, but I don't want to get too tied in with existing franchises. But yeah, they kind of operate on their own terms and operate in a very specific way that best suits them. They will be coming into play at a later date. For now, that's all I have to show you, based off of Aristotle's breakdown of desires and vices and virtues. We have a group of factions that we'll be using, or at least these are the main factions that will come into play throughout our story. Thank you for watching this content recap. Feel free to check out some of the other ones, and feel free to subscribe and stay posted for the next one. I'll see you then. Goodbye.